Well, welcome to the show.
Yes.
Right out the gate, we got to give everybody a heads up. It's springtime, coming up on summertime quick. And I've had the chance to partner with the Dating Divas in a sex seminar they are putting on with 31 different seminars that take place. And it launches on May 15th.
Okay.
So from May 15th to May 29th, you get a chance to join at a dramatically discounted price for what you get. More details will be coming, but I want to let everybody know that coming up next week on the show, we'll talk more about it. But May 15th, there's a great seminar that's going to be starting all virtual, all online. Access it from anywhere at any time. But heads up, be watching because it's a fabulous chance to get a lot of information that'll help your marriage and your sex life. So coming up on today's show, it's Feedback
We love
Wednesday.
Feedback Wednesday.
So every chance we get to talk to the nation where they reach out to us with what's going on with their world, their lives, their questions, we get an opportunity to speak directly to them. And so this will be a fun show to take care of some things that have been sitting in the queue for a little while. So all that's coming up on today's show. So this email came in and says, we use a vibrator during sex so both my wife and I can be pleasured. We've been doing this for roughly the last 5 years. And now I'm noticing when I go to grab the vibrator, it's in different places every time, which gives me the suspicion that she's using it without me. I've brought this up to her asking if she was using it, and she told me no, but then said sometimes when she gets migraines, she uses it, which maybe you didn't realize. Orgasms are fantastic pressure releases for migraines, for cramps.
Yeah, I did not know that.
So
amazing tip for everybody who out there has.
Right, a little helpful tip for everybody out there. So brief history. I've been porn free for the last 2 years after having been addicted for a little over a decade. Therefore, now I'm trying to live 100% with my authenticity, along with not masturbating and giving all that sexual energy to my wife. So I feel like I'm doing everything right, but it seems she's not meeting me even halfway there. We have sex a couple times a week, for which I'm grateful. I have moments where I'd like to have sex more, but she might be stressed or too tired. But I can't help but shake the thought that she's using it on days that she just doesn't want to have sex with me. We have 2 kiddos that are young, and I know we're busy, and it feels like she may be using masturbation, which puts me in the spot of just sitting here waiting. I respect my wife a ton and have brought up my thoughts. However, the last 2 years, it's me tackling urges and finding different ways to meet those urges. To make a long story short, it feels like there's another penis in the equation, but there's not, if that makes sense. Thanks again for all you do for all the married couples out there.
Shoot.
So this is a fun dynamic, I think, to explore, even though there's lots of tension and struggle that'll be within it, right? Because this is one where this will be kind of a theme with some of the conversations we're going to have today. This is one of those that it's like we're not playing fair. I'm doing all this for you, and you're not even meeting me halfway. Yeah. That was his quote, which, first off, I have a problem with that thought process.
Okay, and why do you have a problem with that?
Because marriage is not equal. It's not fair. One person does more than the other on all kinds of different subjects all the time.
Throughout the marriage, yes.
Correct. And that's just the reality of an equation. And so
doesn't mean I have to like it. I'm just saying.
Well, absolutely. That's a fantastic point, Pam. But it's recognizing anytime I use but I do, and if I were to, and those kinds of frameworks, I immediately stack the deck against myself.
So I would think you were stacking it against them. You're saying I stack it against myself.
Ultimately, you're trying to stack it against them, but you're stacking it against yourself. Because when I've done this in our marriage, where it's like, you know what, I feel like all I'm ever doing is this, or I feel like all this, you don't immediately, oh, you're right.
I get defensive typically.
Exactly, because it's this equation that's immediately leaning in a way that won't align or land. It doesn't use the pressure well. It actually further ingrains the dynamic. Schnarch would refer to this as the devil's pact. it further enhances and solidifies.
So a better way to go about it is what? Okay,
well, we're going to come to that in a minute.
Okay.
So table that question, because I am curious when you hear this, because this is one of those things that he's suspecting something's going on, that she's used this. She initially said no, but then came around and said yes. Right. So it's likely she is, which then brings about some bigger questions, right? Because either she's using it or she's moving it around at different times.
Yeah. And it sounds like she's using it. I mean, the question is there anything wrong with that? I mean, ultimately, he perceives it as being wrong because it sounds like he's associating it with the porn use that he used to have an issue with.
Again, and that's where he's using his framework and his journey and projecting it onto her, as in this is a bad thing, rather than wait, if she's using it and it does relieve migraines and it provides some relief for her, is that the problem? That's ultimately one of the
and I guess I would throw in there, even if it doesn't have anything to do with migraines, is there anything wrong with that?
Okay, so context matters. Right? Does she have pleasure from it and she's enjoying it? Because what matters to me is, and the question to ask is, does this diminish the overall experiences together? Right? Is this one of those that it's when her use of the of the vibrator and masturbating, does it diminish her desire to want to be with him? Because his phrase of I feel like I'm in the spot of just sitting here waiting. My question with that is, if you're sitting there waiting, are you reading and mapping the situation and reading it as such that you can't make moves and you don't make moves? Or do you make moves and she shoots
because she's already been satisfied elsewhere, right? By a vibrator.
Right. Because she's already operating with, what, I'm feeling pretty good. And so often what we do in married life is we make these reads and then we don't make our moves, and yet we blame then our spouse for why I didn't make the move. When what if my read is wrong? And more importantly, what if my move could have changed the mood?
Yeah. And both of those scenarios are real. I mean, if you are coming at a move from a good spot, that can make the mood better. And I guess we share this on the air multiple times, but it's, my response to you often is, well, I'm not in the mood right now, but I could be.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what comes down to, I might be going somewhere different than you want to go, but what some of this comes down to seems to be, it sounds like didn't at least start off being fully truthful with him. And so that puts a great divide there. If she's not being real with him about her use of it, that creates another problem. And
because it doesn't line up. The data doesn't line up with what he's seeing, what he's finding,
and so,
and what she's
I'm
saying.
reading some stuff into this, but I'm just thinking, well, is he reading that into when he was using porn and potentially not being honest with her?
Okay. There it goes back to that equation of, if I were to be doing the same thing and dancing around the answers, there would be a lot more hell to pay. To be blunt. Right? The fallback would have been dramatically more than the way it is he's addressing it. And again, this goes back to your question of when we frame things with this whole, well, the way I would do this and the way this would impact me and how it further ingrains the dynamic, the way you get out of this is what you asked earlier in this segment, was you recognize first, we're not playing with equal desires and standards and interests and meanings. That's why this whole thing never becomes apples to apples. If I were to address this way, that immediately the premise is off, because I already know you don't address it that way.
We're different.
So it's not important to you like it is to me, or it doesn't matter and have the same meaning to you that it does to me. So instead, I've got to reel that in, soothe myself with that, and see it as, okay, my goal becomes, how am I being clean, addressing the impact of what I'm reading and how that data does not line up.
Yeah.
And then the further step of, I also feel like if you are using it, I mean, again, this is his moral structure's got to come up with where he stands on this. But hypothetically for me, it would be, if I was him, would be, if you are using that, okay, I get that. I just prefer you be honest about it, be upfront about it. But I also feel like sometimes you're using it and it diminishes the times we could be together. And also, I'd love to be involved in it. And if it was me, I'd be like, well, tell me about it. I'm kind of curious and like to know you enjoy these things. And that kind of gets me jazzed that you get jazzed. And, there's elements of, I bring myself to it better, which brings a different cleanliness of that pressure, which is the same pressure he's trying to attack with this whole, well, if
I would want him to ask the question of himself, if she hasn't been being honest with him about it, what is it in him that he might need to address that his spouse wouldn't want to be honest with him?
Sure. That can be a contributing factor. It's not his fault,
but we all need to look at what is it in me that my spouse wouldn't potentially.
Is there something I'm teaching that shows I don't handle the whole of them well?
Potentially.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a factor, and that's the dicey subject right there, babe, is because then we get caught in, people are going to hear this in the nation with, oh, you're saying
I'm not saying it's his fault.
No, but those are contributing factors because we co-create things, we collude to allow things to keep going because I'm just not honest about it because I don't really want to address the impact of if I were. And it's hard to address the impact of what's coming my way. So I skew it, I frame it differently, I kind of softball it rather than, I have a real problem.
I pose the question because I've had to ask that question of myself, right? Why would my spouse not want to disclose XYZ to me? And I found some pretty interesting things. So I'm coming at that just from personal experience.
No, that's good. But I think it's recognizing how I frame this matters most of all. Because if I look at this as, wait, I'm just sitting here waiting. All right, well, are you sitting here waiting because she's rebuffing you every time you do make moves? Or are you sitting there waiting because you're reading the situation and you're jumping to conclusions rather than testing out that data to see if it's true? There's your step forwards. And you see what happens from that step. Because then you just get a better clarity of what's really going on and what the dynamic is. And it doesn't make it go away, just makes you face it better. So along the same lines, another email came in. I have a question. My wife and I have used toys for a while in the bedroom, and she enjoys the toy that we purchased together, and we've used it quite frequently. I recently bought a prostate toy because I've read that it can be very pleasurable for men. We used it once, and I honestly enjoyed it very much. When I asked her if she'd be willing to use it again, I was told no. When I asked why, I was told because it makes her uncomfortable. The problem I have is she's expecting me to be okay and comfortable with her using a toy. Well, I know it's different for a female to orgasm versus a male, but when it comes to a male wanting to use a toy, it's a no-go. Help with this would be appreciated. Thanks. So some of this is a continuation of what we've just been talking about. Because of the whole, I'm framing this through my lens only, and that gives me apples to apples high ground. When in reality, it's different conversations, different meanings. But what's your thought?
I picked out and heard the word she's expecting. So he's assuming what her expectations are. She did try it, right? She tried it out and it wasn't her thing, made her uncomfortable. So at least there is an attempt to try it out. So I don't know. I think I'm thrown a little bit by the tone there. Yeah, to me, it's one thing if someone says, no, I'm not even going to try it at all. Hey, I had some experience with this and I'm just not there.
Right. Yeah. And that's the good way to think of this is how do I, because again, I think what matters in marriage is recognizing I'm pushed to do things I'm not comfortable with if I'm fully leaning in towards what my spouse may want to do or not do. That comes with the equation.
Okay.
That comes in the dynamic. It doesn't mean it's always way, way out there into the levels of discomfort, disgusting, gross, perverted. However I frame it in my mind, lots of times those suckers are framed that way because it makes it easier to take the stance I take. That's perverted, baby. I would never want to do that. That makes it seem, that adds an immediate high ground judgment on you to try to push you away from ever wanting to try that again. That's the stance that's why we often will react with
that
those
could
things.
be the stance that the wife has taken here, right? That you're saying?
Right. Well, I'm using it just like
Understood.
as an example.
I'm playing it into their scenario to make sure I've got the right person in the right role. Okay.
You're good. So, but it's seeing it as, okay, that kind of a stance is a unilateral, I'm shutting you down move. When what he has to recognize from the emailer is, okay, she can make unilateral moves. Absolutely. The question becomes, are they regularly done? Is it occasionally done, or is it seldom done? Because unilateral moves ultimately can be betrayals of a marriage.
Well, that's extreme
It
wording.
could lead to
okay.
that. It absolutely is, and I'm doing it intentionally because unilateral moves are extreme moves. I'm fundamentally altering any growth. I'm stifling everything. I'm taking hostage both of us in the marriage with this. And sometimes, hear this very clearly, nation, sometimes that's the move you need to make. I'm not willing to do this. And if that's where that absolutely is, then at least he knows what he's up against. Because she did explore it and then realized, I'm not comfortable. Okay, well, you need to dig deeper into what are you not comfortable about with it? Is it the whole genre of prostate play with men and male toys? They have a little bit of a different context than women's toys. They're a little more socially acceptable in some circles than men's toys.
The women's toys are,
women's toys are, right. It's kind of like, there's a whole plethora, but when you look at male sex toys, there's not a whole plethora as much.
Well, and I think that's key because you have a mental game, right? What have I grown up with hearing? What are the societal pressures? And you don't change a mental script overnight.
Right. And so then it comes down to examining, okay, when we used it and it was enjoyable, what was her involvement in that?
Enjoyable for him. Was it enjoyable for her? Right. What did she say when it was done and they had a conversation?
Or what? Yeah, absolutely. But also, how did it all unfold? Was she the one actually using the toy on him? Was he using it on himself with her presence? I mean, so you get into the nuances rather than going so quick with unilateral. Because if you can do that, it can be, wait, I don't really enjoy the operating of the toy on you. But I think I would be a little okay, or it could work towards being okay if you use it during, or if I don't know about it during, or because there's a lot of different ways we can do these things because we are blind to a lot of things that go on in our sex lives, particularly when it comes to our spouse. Because I just refuse to look at it.
Maybe physically. I just close my eyes.
Absolutely. So it's that whole, there's a lot of room in here to examine each other, particularly yourself, in the stance you take, to see it as, is this propelling things forward? Is this something I'm growing and I'm willing to confront? Or no, I'm not. Because ultimately, again, that's a bold move to try to control somebody else rather than I'm just not going to
There's a lot of intimacy to be had within this, as if you can have conversations about this that are not heated, right? Some rational conversations. I guess they could get heated at some point, but the level of intimacy between the two of you can just go to the next level when you're having these topics come up in your relationship.
Yeah, I think of this way you just said, the rational conversations while still handling the hurt associated with it well.
Yeah.
Because that's what's really, if you look at it deep down, when we get defensive about stuff, a lot of times it can be because we're hurt. So how do I handle that hurt but stay in it? That's a different move. And here's the equation I think of when you're talking about these kinds of moves. This is something that happened years and years ago with a client. I don't think I've shared it, but this is the best example of what we often do when we're hurt and we're reactive, and we make these kinds of bold, broad, sweeping, no, you can't do that ever again either, right? Which is when we're objective, we realize that's totally outside my wheelhouse. That's my lane. I can't enforce that, right? So I had a husband who I was working with, was on his second marriage. He had a grown daughter, and he's coming to see me. And right before he comes in, the reason he's coming to see me is because new wife he had discovered was on the road to cheating, if not flat out cheating. He didn't have the details completely, but he was trying to figure it out. Well, daughter had discovered too what had gone on. And so daughter reacts to come to dad's defense, right? And in essence, kind of starts bad-mouthing stepmom, or new wife was really how she was, that's their relationship, the way she referred to her. And when she started doing that, dad was like, no, that's my wife. You don't talk about I don't want you talking about her in that manner, which then made daughter livid. So daughter, right before he walks, this is the conversation while he's coming to my office. Right before he gets to my office, daughter says, well, don't ever call me again. Don't ever text me again, and hangs up. Just the whole cuts off the relationship right away. So he comes in just beat red because he's just as mad as can be because he's there trying to deal with his marriage. And then this piece just happened too. So we kind of do some soothing, kind of start talking about stuff. And then as we're wrapping up, we get back to daughter. And he's like, what do I do about that? And I was like, okay, well, it seems like in some regards, one of your best moves would be you reach out to daughter and say, you know what, honey, if you don't want to talk to me, don't answer my calls. If you don't want to text with me, don't reply to my text. But you don't get to determine if I pick up the phone and call you or not. You don't get to determine if I write a text to you or not. I get to determine that. You get to determine if you respond and engage. That's sometimes the best example I think of when it comes to how am I handling the tension moments in my marriage where I have oftentimes, I'll own this, I do this, I overstep and put an edict and structure on you so you can't do X, Y, Z or won't or whatever, rather than I can't do that. That's beyond my scope. Instead, I'm better off looking at it as how am I handling what my responsibility is and my role is only.